Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have another holiday card for you. This card features a rubber stamp from the Gerda Steiner Designs rubber stamp release. It is a caroling cat. There are 3 caroling cats in the series, and I've chosen this one who looks like he's hitting a high note, and you'll see that it pairs perfectly with this sentiment from Alpine Carolers, Mama Elephant. The sentiment says, "The best way to spread Christmas cheer is singing loudly for all to hear." And so I thought that sentiment paired well with the cute image of a cat who certainly looks like he's having a great time in the image. I started by stamping the cat on some Ink-a-Dink-a-Doo stamping mask paper, and I fussy cut it out. I also cut a generic die cut shape that would cover the sentiment in stamping mask paper, and I'm going to be using the stamping mask paper to protect the images as I stamp the snow from the Gerda Steiner Christmas Mice stamp set. I will be doing watercoloring on this card, and so I am going to heat emboss the images. I could also just use distress ink. I could use archival ink from Ranger, which also would be waterproof, but because I'm going to be using some other embossing on the card, I thought that keeping it consistent and embossing the sentiment and the image would work out well, and it would make them a little bit more prominent because there are going to be a lot of different medias going on top of these images. So I stamped in VersaFine ink, and then since it's a sticky ink, it held the clear embossing powder, and it gives the same effect as black embossing powder. But like I've said in the past in different videos, I find that there's less issues with the clear embossing sticking in places that I don't want it. But before you use embossing powder, I always recommend using a powder bag. I'm sorry, I just lost the words for it. You use a powder bag or some cornstarch to basically keep the static from getting the embossing powder where you don't want it. So now that I have my image and sentiment embossed, I'm going to cover them with the masking paper. The sentiment is going to be covered by a die cut from Spellbinders that basically fits right over it. Thinking about it now, I didn't actually use masking paper for that because masking paper is a little bit more expensive, so instead I just took a piece of cardstock and used some removable adhesive. So if you don't have the masking paper, you could always just use removable adhesive with cardstock. It's just a little bit easier to use the masking paper because the masking paper creates a full adhesive background and will stick better. But for the sentiment, it worked out well. So now I'm taking the snowfall from the Christmas Mice Gerda Steiner rubber stamp, and I'm stamping it randomly with Versamark clear ink, which is a sticky ink, and putting clear embossing powder over it. As you can see when I tilted the card, I'm getting just a whole bunch of snowflakes everywhere. I'm trying to stamp in a very random pattern, and I do leave a little bit of area unstamped on the bottom so that it will look like that is the ground underneath the cat and he's sitting on a little snowbank. Once I have everything covered in a way that I like, and I checked it by running embossing powder over it to make sure there's no areas that have been left out, I will take my heat gun and melt the embossing powder. I'm going to be doing a resist technique. You've seen me do it several times on my channel if you follow my channel. And I will be using distress ink, but I will also be watercoloring, and I'll show you how that works. So I've started by putting all of the round distress foams onto my distress inker tools, and as you saw at the beginning, if you flip over my distress inks, there's a piece of Velcro on the bottom which holds the foams in nicely. I'm using tumbled glass for the lightest blue, broken china for a medium tone of blue, and faded jeans for the darkest blue. I'm not too worried about getting a perfect blend in this situation because I will be adding water to help them blend. Part of the reason that I'm choosing to add water to help them blend is so that I can bring the color right up to the cat. So after I lay on the ink, going from darkest to lightest, I'm going to spray a little bit of water off to the side and use a water brush to bring the color in towards the cat. You could just use a regular paintbrush. I use the water brushes just because they're the best quality brush that I have, but I don't put water in the barrel because I get slightly less control that way, in my experience and opinion. I just prefer to spray out the water. I'm going to avoid putting any ink on the bottom so that it appears like a snowbank underneath the cat. I'm using my fine detail brush when I'm close to the cat, but once I've gotten into the large area where the sentiment is and the rest of the sky is, I decide to switch over to my large flat brush to make things a little bit quicker. You don't have to use too much effort to blend the colors. Distress ink blends naturally very easily, and so it's just adding a little bit of dampness to make the colors smooth out a little bit. I did find that pulling the distress ink towards the cat, it was a little lighter than I had wanted, so I simply tapped on a little tumbled glass distress ink onto my craft sheet and then picked it up with some water and was able to darken the areas right around the cat so that the sky appeared consistent behind him. Now I've added the mask back over the cat because I wanted to add something else to the background to make it appear more like snow after looking at it for a moment. And I didn't bother to mask off the sentiment area because I want the sky to be pretty consistent. I took some Perfect Pearls from Ranger, shook them up, and sprayed it all over. Then I removed the mask and I have the cat to watercolor. I have several different watercolor mediums. I have just plain watercolor straight in like a pan palette, Inktense pencils, but another way that you can watercolor is distress markers. I recommend just using whatever you have on hand. They all create a pretty similar look. I'm fortunate enough to have several options, and since I haven't used the distress markers to watercolor in a while, I just wanted to show you what that looks like. There's two ways you can use distress markers to watercolor. You could also use distress inks to watercolor in a similar way. I am placing the distress marker right onto the image, like scribbling it in a little bit and pulling it out. You could also take the distress marker and scribble it onto your craft sheet or an acrylic block and pick up the color. And you could do the same exact thing with distress ink. Tap the distress ink onto a craft sheet or an acrylic block and pick it up and use it as a watercolor. I find that by applying it directly to the image, I can create some really dark highlights, and if you like that look, then you might enjoy putting it directly onto the image, but if you prefer a little bit more control and not to have areas that are significantly darker, you might want to do the alternative method, which is to put it onto the acrylic block like I had said earlier. So you see that I just keep adding ink till I find the colors the way that I like them. I was using black soot for the cat, and I'm using festive berries for his scarf and his hat. To create a little bit of dimension, I simply color where I want the darkest areas and then blend it out. I decide that I want the cat to be black because it will present a contrast to the blue. I could have done like a brown cat, but I just didn't think the colors would pop as much, and I'm going to pull this black back in at the end of the card by mounting it on some black cardstock. And I think that it provides, like I said, a nice contrast between the sky and the cat, and so it will really stand out. And I want it more of a contrast than a complement. So I'm going to mount the watercolor panel with some foam tape. I use 140-pound watercolor paper from Canson, and this is Scotch 3M 1/16 inch foam tape. I find that if you use foam tape, you don't get as much warping, and it kind of compensates for the warping that you get from watercolor paper. So I'm just going to give it just that slight bit of dimension with the foam tape. Like I said, I'm going to do a black layer, then I have a blue card base, and that's going to be it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more Christmas videos, including the rest of the stamps from the Gerda Steiner Designs rubber stamp Christmas release. You can subscribe to my channel because I will be featuring them over the course of the next few weeks. I will leave links to the products that I've used in the video description below so that you can check them out. And thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.